Let's get started. So we're going to start off with a silly. How are you feeling today? I will tell you, I wake up at number 3 every single day, but I think I've morphed into a number 8 today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited all y'all are here. So feel free to share in the chat, like which number you're vibing with. Sometimes we are just a bucket head and surviving through the day, and I understand. We will do our best to support you through this whole thing. Oh, good, we have another 8. It's not just me excited. And also, we understand it's your lunchtime. We really appreciate that you're doing this on most of your lunchtime. And so feel free to eat, drink, be off camera, do what you got to do. We're not going to hold you accountable, turn on cameras. We just want you to sit back and participate in the ways that are appropriate for you. Thank you. We've got a little bit of everything going on all over the place. We have some sassy ones. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. So very briefly, I'm Hannah Primo. I'm the instructional designer for the University Libraries for The Ohio State University.
And I'm Katie Bloxage. I'm the library director out at The Ohio State University at Newark.
And we're going to get started with a very quick activity. Again, these activities can be done with a sandwich in hand. All you have to do is navigate to menti.com and use the code 23870438. And I'm going to pop that right now into the chat if that makes that easier for people. And we're just, Whitney, if the link's not working for the slides, we'll hook you up. And so we're just asking you, what do you think students' primary emotions are when they work on research? Just what are your vibes? And you can give about 3 different emotions per response. We're seeing a lot of anxiety. That's front and center. I know we kind of put the seed in for that one, but that's still a real thing that we're all feeling like our students are feeling. We have dread. Man, I think we've all felt dread at some point when it came to research, so that's very real. Overconfidence, interesting. Frustration, curiosity, excitement, uncertainty. There's a little bit of everything that the students are feeling. We're going to give you a few more minutes. All right, it's usually when I can't handle the silence anymore is when things start bubbling up. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm curious, how do you know this? Is this assumed? Is this observed? Is this data? We're going to kind of go a little bit deeper into some of these pieces into this presentation. And what to expect today, we're going to talk about what is a bottleneck. We're going to talk about the student perspective, and then we're going to talk about navigating those emotional bottlenecks. And we're going to start off with what are those bottlenecks and is it research anxiety? And I'm going to hand that right off to Katie.
All right. So Pace and Middendorf, they describe a bottleneck as a point in a course, assignment, or process where many students get stuck. So for example, a common bottleneck is developing a research question. This may seem like an easy task, but it requires students to consider what they do and do not know about a topic, the scope of their assignment, and the types of information that could assist them, and if the question itself can even be answered. So research anxiety emerged in the library and information science literature in about 1986, when Mellon published research based on her analysis of the search journals of undergraduate students enrolled in beginning composition courses. Mellon had planned to explore the feelings of undergraduate students that they had about using the library. However, students did not discuss the problems they encountered with search. Students discussed feelings of fear that kept them from beginning to search or that got in the way of their staying in the library long enough to master search processes. With these data, Mellon developed a grounded theory that the feelings of anxiety experienced by students was actively hindering their ability to conduct research effectively. So this spurred a whole lot of research related to library anxiety and research anxiety, continuing well into the present, which included the creation of a number of anxiety scales over the years, including those by Jacobson, Bottlenecks, and Swigan. But if something is sought, it is often found. And unlike Mellon, many of these studies were explicitly looking for anxiety and its root instead of exploring the myriad emotions that students and all of us experience as part of research. So in their article, Dispelling the Myth of Librarian Anxiety and Embracing Academic Discomfort, Maluski and Bruce stated that we know that learning new things can be anxiety-inducing. This anxiety is a perfectly appropriate response to such an overwhelming amount of information during one's academic career. In their work on student self-perception of information literacy, Kirker and Stonebrocker found that students include emotions as part of the research narrative. Regardless of how comfortable they felt about their research skills, students didn't necessarily separate the intellectual work of research from the emotional work of research. So students also described how they use these emotions as part of their research process by managing their frustration, psyching themselves up, and feeling pride in the work that they had done. Their research was meaningful to them, and their emotions were part of that. So now we have a question for you. What research bottlenecks do you think your students are having, and what emotions might you expect to see around them? So we put this link on the slideshow as well as in the chat, go.osu.edu/BA brainstorm. I'll give you a minute to get that into your browser. And then when you get there, you're going to see see the question, what research bottlenecks do you find your students having, and what emotions might you expect to see around them? If you go to the left-hand side of the screen, there's a letter T. You click that, you can then click anywhere in the screen and type in some words, and you'll be able to share those with everyone. So we're actually asking you, so what research bottlenecks have you seen, and what emotions do you think that students might experience around them?
And as you log in, it's going to ask you for your name. Don't fret, you don't even have to use your real name.
Uncertainty is really a big one, not knowing where to start. And I feel that probably affects students probably at any point in the research process. Where do you go next? No worries. You go to the Go link. Oh, interesting. Now, if it's not showing up properly, you can also put it in the chat, and then we can manually put it in.
And you may also have to click off of your text onto the white screen for it to post itself.
There we go. Yeah, concluding that there just isn't much been written about their topic. And then they get really discouraged because they're thinking, oh, I should be able to find something, and nothing is there. And then if you need the refresh button, it's up at the top left-hand corner next to the little trash can. Also, feel free, if you're struggling with the message board, you can always pop them in the chat. Yeah, I think confusion, Sarah, as emotion is a huge one. Yep, overwhelmed the sheer amount of information that we're going to have out there. Getting started with the lit review. Where to start? And are you even on the right track? Ooh, triggered by source encounters. Yeah, primary source encounters are struggling and getting to figure out what is a primary source within their actual discipline or field. You've got a lot of great examples in the chat. So many actually that I am running out of brain space to read them, but these are fantastic.
Absolutely. Google is easier. That seems so hard. Like, man, oh man, I think we've had so many students say that about databases to us. It's not even funny.
How to find actual content.
Yeah. And library jargon. That's real. Because
Yep.
what the heck is a database if you've never encountered one?
Ontology and epi. Yes.
Yeah.
I have to Google that second word on the regular to be like, is my mental definition the same one that this author is using? All right. So we have a good idea of what our students might be experiencing, but from this point forward, we kind of think about so we have what we think our students are expected. So let's see what are our students actually saying or what they're feeling and thinking about as they go through the research process.
So we're going to start off with our findings are actually built off of data collection. This is not just our assumptions, it's what the students told us. And they were based on student interviews from the Ohio State campus out at Newark. And we've collected 20 interviews from fall of 2019 and 18 interviews of fall of 2023. And so all these students at the time were first years, and they were all born after December 31st, 1993. So we're making sure that they were first gen students, Gen Z students, my apologies. And so all of our findings are going to be based on this. And I will also be able to tell you that demographically, our interviews closely matched what the campus's demographics were at the time of these interviews as well. So we identified 6 emotional codes through our interview data: confusion, persistence, challenge, being challenged, self-doubt, the want to give up, and frustration. And we also identified 2 subcodes, which we'll get to in a moment. And we were really surprised to see this range and depth of emotions students experience as part of the research process. We weren't asking them about emotions, we were just asking them about their research process, and of which anxiety was never mentioned. This was not data we expected to find when we set out on this research project. We just thought we'd learn more about how do students search and what do they do when they can't find something. Little did we know. What stood out to us was that frustration and persistence were the 2 emotions most commonly paired within our coding results for both 2019 and 2023. Students were frustrated by research, but that didn't seem to mean that they were actually going to stop in that moment. Persistence proved to be more complex than originally thought, as it could be broken down into 2 areas: passionate and problem solving. In our codebook, we defined passionate persistence as students needing to know the answers or wanting to find the answer. We had to see a mentality where a student was determined to make it work. And we defined problem solving persistence as students describing how they experimented to find solutions to their research problem, pulling out basically every tool they had in their book, or describing their persistence in particularly identifying a resource. An interesting note, in our preliminary analysis of 2023 data, we see very little passionate persistence, but the correlation between persistence and frustration still exists. And so there was again, less passionate persistence, there was a rise in students recognizing that they would be more invested in a project if they were allowed to actually choose that topic. So this moves on to frustration. Frustration was also broken down into two distinct subthemes, where some frustrations were related to time, such as due dates for the research assignment or overlapping due dates in other classes, while others were related to roadblocks, such as the inability to access needed articles or struggling to find information that matches their research topic. Which moves us to an easy activity. Which of these emotions that we discovered did you actually encounter as an early researcher? I think we've all been challenged in the work that we've been doing and had those moments of deep frustration and perhaps gave up on a topic or an article at times. And so feel free to add that into the chat.
And Jason, I like that you're calling out you're expecting them to be overwhelmed, and we kind of expected that too, but students were actually pretty sophisticated in terms of like navigating that overwhelmness feeling.
Yeah, we have all felt that self-doubt. We probably still feel that self-doubt as we continue being scholars and leveling up in our fields. All of a sudden, we're faced with those that are even elevated higher than us, going, "Oh no, do I belong here? Am I actually doing the research as I should?" That kind of almost doesn't go away until you reach that top, and perhaps it doesn't then either. And so, showing students, "Hey, this is happening to us. Had happened to us." Yeah, self-doubt, man. Thank you so much for sharing. These are some serious things that we probably didn't talk about in the time.
Okay. So now that we have these data from our students, what do we do with it? So these are three areas where we're recommending that we can focus our attention to help students navigate these emotional bottlenecks: information availability, meaningful inquiry, and leveraging previous experiences. So in this example from our in our student interviews, John is trying to get the full text of an article, but he can't access it through the database. He and his classmate continue to search through pages of information to find this one source. While their frustration at being unable to find the source fuels their persistence, part of the problem is a technical one. If John knew who he could talk to beyond their instructor to get help, they could have come to a solution with less frustration and use that mental power for continuing their research, not troubleshooting. And as you can see, they were on EBSCO and they clicked on the full text, and that PDF never did show up. So he and his classmate were trying to figure out, how do we get this information? Because it's one really good piece of information, but they were searching through pages of stuff that just did not fit. In this interview, Andy describes the challenges of hitting a paywall. So what? It was $10,000 to get access to this data. It makes it really hard to do research, you know? He describes a lot of frustration about hitting this wall, but what are some ways that this could be relieved? So information availability is an area where we can reduce the number or type of bottlenecks that students experience. As instructors and as librarians, we can partner with our colleagues in and across the library and IT departments to make resources more transparent and methods of access clearer. We can also work with students as they adapt their search strategies to an ever-changing information landscape. They're already problem-solving their ways out of information roadblocks, but we can assist them in refining that process by providing insight into how information is organized in their specific topics, be that databases or books, and where it can be accessed. We can also encourage a change of mindset on the part of the students where they see themselves as actors within the information lifecycle, not just observers.
And this brings us to March. In this excerpt, March explains how they check in with the assignment before they actually start on their own research path. First step is to go and log into Carmen and see where information is provided. But if it's not helpful, or if I need anything extra, I may or may not look through and see if they have anything listed in the announcements or the syllabus or whatever on Carmen that is specific to that class. Otherwise, I probably go to the library or I just Google it. There we go, we have Google. If students are using assignments as a guide for their research, then this is an opportunity for instructors to purposely integrate information literacy in the form of explicit examples of the research process for that discipline, as well as linked resources into the curriculum and into assignments. So co-creating meaningful assignments can help students identify feasible research questions and topics and provide useful support when an information need is unsuccessful. Dio describes their search process for a project that they are deeply interested in, but are struggling to find information. Mostly reading through, I go through the gender studies database, type in anything that could be related to that. Currently, the article I most recently printed out and going through is venereal disease, prostitution, and militarized masculinity in the Third Reich, and trying to relate that back to Kylo Ren. Students are passionate when they can choose their own topics, but may also then struggle to find related information. Building information literacy into the assignment gives students a framework for how to approach research challenges and manage their own frustrations when hitting roadblocks. Incorporating information literacy into research assignments can encompass a wide range of activities in the course. Students can be introduced to the idea that they are participating in a conversation with the discipline. You can discuss how research is an iterative process, and finding one answer can lead you to new questions. Or students can be asked to consider how different types of sources will have different levels of authority depending on the context and questions being asked. This is also an opportunity to bring more people into the course design process, fellow faculty from other disciplines, librarians, instructional designers, writing centers, and other folks. And this also can look like reusable learning objects that can be embedded into courses or that live on a library website. This is a shameless plug for our own website, in which we have created a slew of resources that should be able to assist your students with various forms of research and are easily embedded into your courses. Providing this sort of hands-off assistance may have the potential to bring students more success with persistence, giving students more or superior options before they've actually depleted all their choices. Students also draw upon previous research experiences and assignments to match their current information needs. While this is beneficial in many ways, it can lead to frustration when the prior pathways don't meet the current assignment. I'm pretty picky with my sources, just because in high school, I was trained to look for reliable sources, and so I typically avoid blog posts. Roadblocks that they encountered earlier in their educational career can still cause frustration if students aren't sure how to circumvent them in a new environment. I thought I found a good article to do it, but then when you click on the link, it says it was blocked. Literal roadblocks. Knowing that students are using their past research experiences as a map, we can encourage flexibility when approaching complex problems and situations. There is no one right way to approach research, but there are pathways that are more productive than others and some that are discipline specific. It's our job not to encourage giving up, but to remind that backwards movement is still momentum, and showing them that the research process is cyclical and that it's normal for even professionals to have research questions shift and change directions. Discarding a resource that you spent so much precious time on finding isn't actually failure. It's normal, and giving students space for this shift is entirely vital for a student's evolution into a scholar.
So now that you kind of have an overview of all these different possibilities, as well as the emotions that students are having in the context in which they're having them, we want to think about what ways that we can support these findings better in our own work with students. So we have the go.osu.edu BA brainstorm. So we have a new blank page in there if you want to return to that, or if you want to unmute and give us some of your ideas, or if you want to throw them in the chat, all of these options are possible. But since we've kind of provided a lot of information to you all, we want to have some space here where we can talk a little bit about, what can we do with this work and how can we make this easier for students to navigate those emotional bottlenecks. And once you get to that Go link, down at the bottom, there is the left-hand side, there is a 1 with a caret next to it. You click the caret, it brings you to the next page. And if you signed in late, if you click on the T on the left-hand side, it should open up a little box. You can click anywhere on the page, open up a box, type in your whatever you need to type, hit enter, and it should appear. But also, if it is not working for you or it's just being annoying, you can also feel free to unmute or throw your thoughts and questions in the chat. Jason has a good example. Messaging campaigns around the emotions that students commonly experience. I think that's really important, is to kind of normalize these experiences. So students aren't expecting just to feel perhaps confusion or frustration, but like, what do you do productively with that information? I think it might be comforting to students to find that yeah, there are a lot of students that are either problem solving their way out of research scenarios, or that they're really, really interested in what they're searching for. And so they're willing to do a lot of work to find that correct information, or the information that works best for me.
And Beth, absolutely. Figuring out who to ask to look for help. Like making that very much a priority of sharing in a course of you're doing these tasks, these are your resources, and pairing them perhaps even in the assignments. Going, great, we're digging into resources right now. This is your librarian. This is your direct link to your reference desk. And as librarians, we've done a lot of work inside courses to help students become not afraid of talking to us. And so likely wherever you might be, there's a librarian who's willing to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think being honest about those challenges that you experience as an undergraduate or a graduate, or today, as a way to build rapport and demystify that research process. Because yeah, I think a lot of students think, oh, well, I'm already supposed to know that, or this person already knows it. And kind of accept that as a group, we're all just kind of figuring this out as we go. And then as we gain more knowledge, it gets a little bit more manageable.
Absolutely. And they've possibly ran into an instructor previously that went, how do you not know this? Or a fellow student that went, how do you not know this? And so allowing that safe space to not know things is really important.
Nathan, I love that you're calling out that shared experience in sessions. That has been a common thread that Hannah and I have found in our 2023 data, is really getting them to get students kind of talking about, like, get conversation with others, what you're good at, what you're struggling with, and seeing how those apply to all sorts of research activities. But yeah, I think everything does connect to research, but yeah, that's not always connected for students. Sometimes we have to make that a little bit more explicit so that students know, oh, the things that they're feeling or seeing are the same as what we're feeling and seeing. But yes, let's all bring our research emotions to the party.
Absolutely.
And be happy about
suggestions are small that people are making. They're not a big lift. And so it doesn't take a lot of effort to make a little bit of extra work to go, hey, we felt this way. You might be feeling this way too. This is normal. Let's help you. And the challenging emotions, being challenged was students talking about how an assignment was really hard, but not in a bad way. So we can clarify that very nicely. And it was truly students talking about, this is new, I've never done this before, but I was supported along the way, some way, shape, or form. Yep. I I almost always tell students it's good to be skeptical about your resources. I almost start off with that when we're talking about evaluation because it is. It's good to ask questions, productive questions, instead of being a toddler going why about everything.
Mhm. So kind of in closing, we want to make sure we had enough time for questions and thoughts. So research isn't always meant to be comfortable, and the feelings that we found students expressing are entirely normal feelings for them to have about their research. So it's kind of part of our job to acknowledge their emotions and find ways to assist in navigating those emotional bottlenecks that have nothing really to do with learning content, but while supporting the growth of ways of thinking about the research process. Oh, Nathan is talking about a class on lit reviews yesterday. Oh yeah, Discord. Yeah,
Brilliant.
making a playlist.
Yeah, Discord threads, brilliant.
And that's a really good way to frame what a lit review is.
Yeah, because they're pretty mysterious to a lot of people. So some of you might be attending today as part of one of the optional workshops for the Meaningful Inquiry endorsement. If you are, we want you to make sure that you record your attendance on your participation log, that you've come to the thing, you've done the thing. If not, and you are an Ohio State employee, we have a URL for that, which you can actually explore that a little deeper. And if I find my right link, I can share it with you. There we go. To learn more about what is it to make your research project more meaningful to students, because this is just one small tangent to all the rest of those pieces. But what we're going to do is open the floor to y'all. If you have questions, you have thoughts, if you want to brainstorm some ideas of how to make this work in a class, you actually have 3 experts on instructional design as well as how to do research design. And so we're giving you space for that reflection as well as some of that work here as a surprise bonus for your day.
Here is our contact information again, but you'll get the slide. Um, here's our biographical references. So question about whether we published this research yet? Sort of. We have so along with this research, in addition to the interviews, the purpose of this was we had a survey that we were looking at information assumptions. So we have the data from the 2019 survey that has been published, and then we have a forthcoming publication in the Journal of Information Literacy, which will be out in June, which is about the emotional piece. But that's, again, just the 2019 data. We just did the 22-23 data, so we're working on that. But if you want to read more about emotions in research and anxiety, highly recommend you check out some of the biographical references. I really want to call out Kirker and Stonebreckers, Architects, Renovators, Builders, and Fragmenters. It's a wonderful article, really interesting. Everyone should go read it. I think Hannah would like me to stop talking about that article. But to open up the floor for this really PowerPoint, let's go back to especially if we're going to discuss the different types of emotions that students might be having and how to kind of incorporate those. These are the big 6 that we found in our first year students. So we're curious if anyone has, thoughts on how you could incorporate this or ways that we kind of move this forward.
So Juliana asked in the chat, do you use this as an icebreaker for your instruction?
Not yet, but I should. I haven't actually not done a lot of instruction in the last year.
And as a follow-up, as an opening check-in to see where students are at.
My role is mostly guidance for others who are instructing right now, and so I don't necessarily get to have that experience, but we did incorporate in one of our credit-bearing courses a midway through the semester check-in, and we're like, how are you feeling? Post a GIF in the discussion board to tell us, or a sound effect, make it like open accessible. And we had students posting hilarious GIFs and really honest pieces of like, these are the feelings I'm feeling right now. This semester is getting rough. And so it was a place where they could do that without any effort and really be honest about that. And we could share, yeah, we're also having a rough time. It's middle of the semester.
I have used this in my conversations with faculty about the emotions that their students might be having, or particularly tying that persistence piece, so that what if students are getting frustrated, how are we designing our assignments or instruction to alleviate some of that frustration? Jason, I'm not, do we find some less common but remarkably positive emotions? Do you mean in addition to the ones we found here? These are the only ones that were like significant.
Yeah, I was just thinking like maybe maybe that the reason that maybe like super positive emotions are less common is we haven't stumbled upon the conditions for creating those. So maybe looking at less at the most common emotions, but those rarer ones to see if they have some clues for how we could like make those more common, if that makes sense.
It really does. And persistence, honestly, I know it may not feel like it, but it was the most positive one that we've felt, because we had students talking about all the tools as they talked about their persistence. I tried searching advanced this way. I really dug into the database this way. I tried different search tools. And because of that, their persistence is very oftentimes associated with something they're interested in or have a driving force. And the reason passionate persistence existed was students liked their topic. That was it. They were really curious about the answer to their research question. And so having that piece where students have their autonomy in some way, shape, or form related to their research was very clearly connected to this positive piece.
And just to jump in really quickly, Jason, I think you had mentioned as a comment in the chat about how students might feel positive if the search terms they entered like match the articles that they find. That could be like a very positive emotion. So perhaps something that you could do would be to ask students to describe what's an experience you had when searching went really well, and what that felt like. And so kind of start to raise some of the fact that they've probably done this before and it actually has worked pretty well, so that they could start harnessing that emotions. Just a thought. But again, I'll step back because I was not involved in Han and Kitty's research, so I can't answer direct questions to that. But that was just an idea that popped up.
And Nathan, I appreciate that you're asking students to read the assignments and ask what they feel in response to it. Like that's a really useful and practical way to have students kind of thoughts about it. And then also if they're feeling frustrated or angry about it, that gives them the space to kind of lower through, okay, like, well, how do we navigate that? How can we make this less frustrating?
Beth has a comment in here about her library director being excellent at making time to schedule for students to tour the library, learn how to research. I will be incorporating this into my class time, not just assume someone else, other faculty did it, which I think is a really great point to make. We may have our own expectations about what students should already know coming into our classes that could influence how we, so we want to think about what those expectations might be.
And often we want to really emphasize that, like, we might not want to alleviate all the feelings of frustration because learning is hard. Sometimes it takes being frustrated to move past that aha moment to actually learn a concept. But it's removing those barriers that have nothing to do with learning. Figuring out how to navigate to a database has nothing to do with knowing how to make a lit review. Yeah, it's part of the process, but being able to actually figure out what concepts those are being talked about and learn the content, that's what's important in that moment. And so being able to remove some of those frustration barriers so they can be, that energy can be spent in places of learning that content is huge. And I think that's the biggest thing that we were discovering, that students really want to learn. They really want to learn about the stuff that's in front of them. But there's so many little oddball things that are stopping them in their tracks that we could probably help adjust and normalize, truly normalize.
Jason, yeah, walking through the process of encountering confusing information relating to that first experience, I think that's an excellent way. We didn't share all this data, but we were astonished by the number of students that were clearly linking what they'd done in high school to what they were doing in college. And in sometimes they were doing kind of like a one-to-one mapping, which is also sometimes why they ran into some frustrations because that didn't work. But they had research experiences from previous classes and from previous levels of education, and they were really excited to share how they problem solve those. They had lots of thoughts. Yeah, Nathan, I think it is. I agree. It's useful to say like, yep, you're going to have feelings and thoughts about your research, and that is both normal and exciting. And let's talk about how we deal with that. High school experience matters.
Yeah, that's a great point, Teresa. Students are bringing their prior knowledge from high school and trying to use it. That's also a little concerning, though, considering the number of students who may be coming from schools where they did have no high school library, they had no information literacy instruction, they may not have had, access to databases. So unfortunately, some students are going to come in with experience that they are with lacking experience that they can connect really easily. So big plug out there for librarians in schools.
Yeah, particularly because we've seen a lot of instances where students' previous knowledge actually was like, oh, .org, those are reliable, those are safe. And we're like, actually, after the interview, and there's students that are coming in with misinformation because their teachers are doing the best they can with the little resources that they actually have. And so that's also something to think about, that we're sometimes battling misconceptions that they're walking in as well as those previous experiences. So it's a bigger battle than sometimes we can actually see on the surface.
So this can be really useful to talk to faculty about in terms of like designing a research assignment, is getting students to like link back to, okay, think about something that you did as a research project in high school, in or out of sight of school. Okay, how did you do that? And have students kind of talk through the experience, maybe in class, of how did they solve some of those problems, and so they can start to see both what's going to work and apply in this context and what they're going to be kind of leveling up in.
Yep.
And I'll jump in really quickly. I put a link to this in the chat. But if you're interested in some of the sort of misconceptions that students might have, there's notions like a .org is a good source, is automatically a good source. One of the upcoming workshops in this series is on outdated research notions that students may have, or that we, instructors may also have. And so if you're interested in that, I put a link in the chat where you can see all the upcoming workshops and register.
We appreciate everyone coming and chatting with us and sharing and reflecting on their own practices. If you're curious about our future comparisons of what students have shifted pre and post pandemic, we're working on that this year. So you'll see something in the coming year or so. No promises that that's soon, but we're more than happy to talk to people outside of this if you would like to email us. Biases. We asked students, and interesting finding from this current group of students, so post pandemic students that very clearly had emergency teaching during pandemic times, they started talking more about biases. They're talking more about evidence-based. They're using the word evidence-based. There was no students that talked about that in 2019. And so students are far more aware about different evaluation techniques than they used to be, which is not something we expected to particularly find. We were hoping to see something, but it's something that's there. We will be delving deeper and exploring that and sharing with folks later on.
Yeah, there's still some confusion about what bias is and how to use that, but it was something that was very like top of mind for a lot of students. And then they were also kind of at various points labeling things as misinformation or disinformation. They had a language to describe this that they did not have pre-pandemic, or at least they were not providing us pre-pandemic. TBD on what that means.
So please go ahead and feel free to add additional questions or comments that you would like to have in the chat, or unmute if you would like to. But we'll share really quickly. Everyone will get a follow-up email sometime later today. We'll have a link to the slides and to the recording, as well as information on upcoming workshops and the endorsements that we talked about. So you'll get all of that information. And you can feel free to email any of the three of us if you have any questions about any of the content from today or any of the upcoming events or anything like that. And we're happy to talk more with all of you about that.